Good evening. My name is Jeremy Miller. I'm the program director for the Idris Stelly Foundation. I think just about everyone sitting up here is familiar with me. I'm here to reiterate our opposition to the proposal of equipping CIT-trained officers on the San Francisco Police Department with electronic control weapons. And I want to begin by taking a very hard look at both the May 27th Department Bulletin and comparing it with discrepancies in the draft proposal. We've heard several times tonight that the Department Bulletin directs that under circumstances when the person suffering an apparent mental crisis is not a threat to any other person, officers shall observe, maintain a safe distance, and attempt to stabilize the scene. However, when we go to the draft proposal, right here in permissible use, we have the ECW is intended for situations in which a subject reasonably presents an imminent physical threat to him or herself, the officer, or others. So right there's a contradiction. That is followed by about 4 more in restrictions. Upon a handcuffed subject, unless the use of the ECW is necessary to prevent the subject from causing serious bodily injury to him or herself or others, prohibited use. The subject does not present an imminent threat to the officer, members of the public, or him or herself. So I find it very disingenuous. I don't have to read through the whole thing. There's a couple more in here. But I don't understand why it's being claimed that it would only be used when the subject is a threat to others, when it's right there in the draft proposal that it will be used if the subject is perceived as a threat to themselves.
I'll take another look at the draft proposal and make sure that it's consistent, because obviously I want everything consistent with the bulletin that's been successful today.
Okay. Secondly, I would like to know what steps, since February of 2011, the department has taken to comply with its obligation to collect data about mental health crisis calls, including the number and location of calls for service involving mentally ill individuals in crisis, who responded, whether it was a CIT officer, non-CIT officer, CIT officer and medical health professional, etc. Whether or not force was used, injuries, complaints, commendations, and or legal action arising from the incident. I think that this is the type of information that is crucially relevant and necessary for the public and the Commission to make an informed decision about any new weapons system. There were several cases cited here tonight of officer-involved shootings and use of force incidents that I would like to speak to. One case that was brought up earlier in the evening was the case of Randall Dunklin, although it was not by name, but that was the man in the wheelchair south of Market who was seeking mental health assistance, was unable to receive it, and went into crisis mode, proceeded to go down the street with a very small knife that, by my assessment of the video, he was attempting to drop when he was shot multiple times. I wonder how exactly that situation would be resolved differently with tasers, because based on this draft policy, I see no room whatsoever for the steps recommended in ECW use. This is significant to me because 8 out of 10 taserings that occur are taserings of people with mental health difficulties. And on that note, crisis intervention teams and nonviolent de-escalation is not new. In fact, it's been on the table for several years. Why has that program not been fully implemented, and why is the public not then allowed to assess the rate of violent altercations and the success of that program prior to even thinking about authorizing the force to use a new weapon?
Thank you. That's very good.
Another case that was cited by the chief and several others, though not by name, probably for legal reasons, was the case involving Pralith Palung, which was at the Embarcadero. I wonder why this case is repeatedly cited as a justification for taser use, despite the explicit, publicly recorded objections of Pralith Palung's family members to exploiting that case for this specific purpose. That, to me, is disingenuous, and it shows the lengths that the police department is willing to go to promote its cause for tasers without integrity. I find it unconscionable, and I wonder why this keeps happening. I want to talk about money for a minute. Because though there is a community group that has proposed to assume the cost of the tasers themselves, thus far, part of the draft policy requires the issuance of defibrillators. Okay? And so to date, the police department has not presented the public with any funding source to offset that cost. And while we're on money, let's talk about lawsuits. Because lawsuits over tasers have happened all over the country to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. Conservatively, $10 million in damage since 2009 in California alone. Just as recent as September, reported in December, Portland was under a federal investigation and was found in violation of the law for its taser policies and its taser uses, and as a result, they cut a deal with the federal government to set up more drop-in centers, CIT, and the reforms that the Portland Police Department implemented came at a cost of something around the tune of $57 million annually for some time to come, to show the extent of both the damages of the misuse of tasers and damages resulting from litigation to this. Oakland, right across the bay, has just come out from under the shadow of federal receivership, which it probably, frankly, should have gone into. So all around us, in our immediate vicinity in the country, we like to talk nationally, but just right here in the local region, in the 9th Circuit, to take it to a legal level, we have multiple examples of what can happen, and yet there's no offset. Taser International has thrown its liability on the POA and San Francisco Police Department, and that liability then goes onto the general fund, onto the taxpayers of San Francisco, because when there are police abuse-related lawsuits, that's who ultimately winds up paying for this. So, if the concept is to introduce such a hazardous new weapon, is the POA or the San Francisco Police Department on their own willing to change these policies so that they pay the cost of these million-dollar lawsuits as opposed to the taxpayers of San Francisco? Finally, I want to talk about deaths, because we've talked about money, we've talked about propaganda. I want to talk about actual taser-related deaths. And the independent research that the Idris Stelly Foundation has conducted has found that there have been at least 766 people in North America, including 30 in Canada, killed by tasers since 1983. That's a lot for a less than lethal weapon. Tasers have been internationally condemned by United Nations affiliates as a torture device. There is a huge span between less than lethal weapon and torture device, and I think that the San Francisco Police Department owes the public an adequate explanation of how they believe they can bridge that gap. From January 2009 to September 2012, there were 181 taser-related deaths by law enforcement in the United States. Finally, I want to point out that all independent studies have shown heavy racialized use of ECWs. Generally across the country, with a roughly 300% higher incident rate with African Americans. However, peculiarly to California, the highest targeted population is actually Latino. I don't have that statistic right in front of my face right now, but I believe it was something to the tune of 40%. So you know, none of these issues are addressed in the draft policy, but they are very, very vital issues, and pulling these all together, I think it resoundingly sounds a call to oppose the current proposal to issue CIT officers with tasers. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, can I ask one follow-up?
Yes.
I know you've studied this a lot, so I just wanted to ask, in any of your research, have you come across, you know, maybe there's other departments within the city we should ask, but given that the city of San Francisco has tasers just for another department, did you come across any liability specifically that the city has incurred thus far?
You're referring to the Sheriff's Department?
Yes.
Yes, we have. And we've actually provided this commission with a lot of our research, but I can go back and
Do you have that
research. I don't have it handy at the moment. I can absolutely compile that and presented.
Okay, I appreciate it. We don't often get to ask questions back and forth, so I'm just taking the opportunity to ask you guys while you're here. Thank you.
Absolutely.